You picked it up before you even realized you were doing it. No notification, no reason, just a reflex. Fingers moving before a thought was formed, eyes dropping to a screen before the room even had a chance to exist. And for a moment, you were gone. Not gone in a dramatic way, just to somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't here, wasn't this, wasn't you sitting in your own life with your own thoughts. That moment is worth staying with, not to judge it, just to feel what it actually is. Because something is happening to you, slowly, quietly, in a way that doesn't announce itself. And it starts exactly there. Carl Rogers spent his life asking one question, not a clinical question, not a philosophical puzzle, a human one. He wanted to know what gets in the way of a person becoming who they actually are. He called it the real self, not the self you perform, not the self that learned to survive, the one underneath all of that, the one with its own instincts, its own needs, its own quiet knowing. He believed every person is born moving toward that self, naturally, organically, the way a plant turns toward light. But something can interrupt that movement, and he couldn't have known about the phone. He died in 1987, but what he understood about the human mind maps onto this moment in a way that should stop you. Think about what happens in the first 10 minutes after you wake up, before your own thoughts have had time to form, before you've sat with yourself, before you've felt the weight of the day, before you've even asked yourself how you actually are. You're already inside someone else's world, someone's opinion, someone's highlight reel, someone's curated version of a life that has nothing to do with yours, and your nervous system absorbs it all as if it were real, as if it were relevant, as if it were you. Rogers had a concept he called conditions of worth, the idea that from a very young age, we learn which version of ourselves gets love, acceptance, approval. We learn to hide the parts that don't. We build a self-concept, an image of who we are, not from the inside out, but from the outside in. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Your phone is a conditions of worth machine. Every time you post something and wait, even for a second, for a response, your nervous system is running a calculation it learned in childhood. Am I enough? Do I belong? Will I be accepted? You didn't choose that. Nobody does. But the phone has found a way to automate it, to accelerate it, to make it happen dozens of times a day. And every time you scroll past someone's life and feel that small, quiet contraction in your chest, that almost invisible sense of not enough, you are not being irrational. You are being human, in an environment designed to exploit exactly that. If this is sitting somewhere real in you, if something here is touching something you haven't quite named yet, you're not alone in that. There are people watching this right now who feel this same quiet unease. If this channel is the kind of space you want to return to, consider subscribing, not for the content, for the company of people asking the same questions you are. Rogers believed that the self-concept, the story we tell ourselves about who we are, is always in conversation with experience. When experience matches the story, we feel whole. When it doesn't, we feel fragmented, lost, slightly off. Now imagine checking your phone 80 times a day. 80 micro moments of someone else's experience flooding yours. 80 tiny calibrations of your self-worth against an external mirror. The story you tell yourself about who you are stops being written by you. And the strange part, the part that makes this genuinely difficult, is that it doesn't feel like anything dramatic. There's no moment of rupture, no crisis you can point to. It's more like you just start to feel less like yourself. You become a little harder to reach, even for yourself. Your own thoughts feel quieter than the noise. Your own feelings feel slower than the feed. And then one day you realize you haven't been alone with yourself. Truly alone, not performing, not consuming, not producing, in longer than you can remember. Rogers called that state incongruence, the gap between who you actually are and who you've learned to be. And here's what he found. When that gap grows too wide, something in a person starts to break down. Not loudly, just a slow erosion, anxiety without a name, a flatness that doesn't lift, a feeling of going through motions in a life that should feel like yours but somehow doesn't. Does that sound familiar? Because the phone doesn't just distract you, it fragments you. It trains you to exist in short bursts of reaction, to feel in sound bites, to think in captions. And the real self Rogers was talking about, doesn't operate in short bursts. It's slow, it's layered, it needs silence to surface, it needs boredom to breathe, it needs the kind of time that has no output, no audience, no metric. The phone eliminates exactly that kind of time. Think about the last time you were genuinely bored, not checking something while you waited, not filling a silence with a scroll, actually bored, restless, nowhere to go inside the screen. Most people haven't had that experience in years, and boredom, real boredom, used to be where the self did its most important work, where thoughts surfaced that weren't triggered by content, where feelings arrived that weren't in response to a stimulus, where you simply existed, without producing, without performing, without being seen. That space is where the real self lives, and we've paved over it. If you've ever put your phone down after an hour of scrolling, and felt worse than before you picked it up, emptier, more anxious, slightly ashamed without knowing why, that's not weakness. That's your organism giving you information. Rogers believed we are always receiving signals from inside ourselves about what is true, what is needed, what is real. He called it the organismic valuing process. The body knows, the gut knows, the self knows, but you have to be quiet enough to hear it. And this is the part that nobody tells you, because it doesn't fit into a productivity tip or a digital detox challenge. The problem isn't really the phone. The phone is a symptom. It's the place you go when being yourself feels like too much, when the silence feels threatening, when the inside is so loud or so empty that the outside, any outside, feels like relief. The phone gives you somewhere to put your eyes when you don't want to look inward. And the question underneath all of this, the one Rogers would have asked, isn't how do I use my phone less? It's, what are you avoiding? What is so uncomfortable about being with yourself, in the quiet, without distraction, that you reach for the screen before you've even felt it? That's not a question to answer right now. It's a question to carry, to let sit, to watch what comes up when you hold it. But let's go a little deeper into that, because most people, when they hear what are you avoiding, think it's about something dark, some buried trauma, some unresolved grief, and sometimes it is, but more often, and this is the part that quietly breaks people, what you're avoiding is something much more ordinary. You're avoiding the version of yourself that doesn't know what it wants, the one that, when left alone in a room without input, without stimulation, without someone else's story to follow, doesn't quite know who it is or what it feels or where it's going. That version of yourself feels threatening, not because it's broken, but because we live in a world that has no patience for uncertainty. The phone fills that uncertainty instantly, effortlessly, without judgment. You don't know what you want. Here's 30 things someone else wants. You don't know how you feel. Here's how other people feel. Curated and compressed into 30-second windows of emotion. You don't know who you are? Here's an algorithm that will tell you. It will show you what you engage with, what makes you linger, what makes you react, and slowly, without your consent, it will build a version of you out of your own behavioral data, and you will start to live inside that version. Rogers had a phrase he returned to again and again. He talked about the fully functioning person, not a perfect person, not an optimized person, someone who is open to their experience, not defended against it, not managing it from a distance, not curating it for an audience, just open, feeling what is actually there, noticing what is actually true, moving from the inside out rather than the outside in. That kind of openness requires a relationship with yourself that the phone is steadily, systematically destroying. And here's what makes it so insidious. It feels like connection. When you're scrolling, when you're reacting, when you're sending and receiving and liking and being liked, it feels social. It feels human. Your brain registers something that resembles belonging. But Rogers made a distinction that matters here. He talked about the difference between being seen and being understood. Being seen is surface. It's the like, the view count, the recognition. It registers quickly and fades just as fast, which is why you need more of it. Being understood is something else entirely. It's slower. It requires presence. It requires the kind of conversation that goes somewhere neither person planned. It requires someone to sit with the complicated version of you, not the caption, not the highlight, but the actual texture of your inner life. The phone can simulate being seen endlessly, but it cannot give you being understood. And somewhere inside you, you already know the difference. That's why the emptiness after scrolling isn't just tiredness. It's the specific ache of having been seen by nobody, of having consumed connection without ever really touching it, of having performed your existence for an audience that was never truly watching, because they were also performing, also consuming, also waiting to be seen. Two mirrors facing each other, infinite reflection, no one actually there. If what you're feeling right now has a name you haven't been able to give it before, I want to hear it. Leave a comment below. Tell me what this is landing on. Share what part of your own life this is touching. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe and leave a like, not as a transaction, but as a way of saying, this conversation matters, because reaching more people depends on that small gesture from you. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being constantly connected. It doesn't look like loneliness from the outside. You have followers. You have people who respond. You exist visibly in digital space. But underneath that visibility, something is receding. The more you perform yourself, the less you inhabit yourself. Rogers called this the gap between the presented self and the experienced self. And he said this gap, when it becomes wide enough, when it persists long enough, produces a specific kind of psychological suffering. Not dramatic, not loud, just a creeping sense that the person living your life is a character you've been playing for so long you've forgotten there was someone underneath. And the tragedy isn't that you chose this. Most of us didn't choose it. We were handed devices as children, as teenagers, at the exact moment in development when identity is the most fragile, the most searching, the most desperately in need of genuine reflection. We were handed a machine that offered us infinite reflection, and we didn't know yet that reflection isn't the same as understanding. We grew up inside the performance before we ever had a chance to find the self that was supposed to be performing. So when Rogers talks about becoming a person, and he used that phrase deliberately, becoming, not being, because he understood it as a process, he's talking about something that has to be reclaimed now, in a way it never had to be before. You have to choose the silence actively, against the pull of everything that has been designed to fill it. You have to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing who you are when no one is watching, not because discomfort is noble, but because the self only speaks in frequencies the noise drowns out. There is a version of you that existed before the first account you created, before the first profile photo, before the first time you watched someone else's life and measured yours against it. That version didn't know how to perform. It just felt things, wanted things, noticed things without filtering them through what was acceptable, what was shareable, what would land well. It was unpolished and uncertain and completely, quietly yours. You haven't lost that version. That's not how the self works. It doesn't disappear. It recedes. It waits. It sends signals through the noise that you've been learning to dismiss as anxiety, as emptiness, as vague dissatisfaction with a life that looks fine from the outside. Those signals are not symptoms of a problem with you. They are the real self, asking to be heard. What would it mean to give yourself 10 minutes tomorrow, not to meditate, not to journal, not to optimize anything, just to sit without the phone, without a plan, without producing a single thing? Not as a technique, not as a habit to build, just as an act of return. Returning to the room you're actually in, to the body you're actually living inside, to the thoughts that are actually yours, not triggered, not borrowed, not performing for anyone, just yours. That sounds simple, and it is simple, but simple is not the same as easy, because the pull toward the screen isn't just habit, it's a story you've been told, and slowly started to believe, that you are most real when you are visible, that you exist most fully when someone else is watching. Rogers would have called that the deepest form of incongruence, living as though your existence requires an audience, but you were here before anyone was watching, and you'll be here after the screen goes dark. Rogers said the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change, not when I fix myself, not when I become better, more disciplined, more intentional. when I accept what is already true. And here's how that lands in this conversation. The version of you that reaches for the phone, that's not your enemy. That's a person doing what they learned to do to feel safe, to feel connected, to feel seen in a world that often doesn't see you. That version of you deserves understanding, not contempt. But understanding it is different from being trapped in it. When you can look at the reflex, really look at it, with some gentleness, you create a small space between the impulse and the action. Just a breath, just a pause. And in that pause, something else becomes possible. Not a better version of you, just more of you. The you that exists before the performance, before the comparison, before the scroll. Rogers believed that becoming a person is a lifelong process, not a destination, not an achievement, a direction. The real self isn't something you find once and keep. It's something you keep orienting toward, again and again, in small moments, in quiet choices, in the willingness to sit with yourself even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. You picked it up before you even realized you were doing it. We said that at the beginning, but you put it down, or you're about to, and you listened. For however many minutes this has been, you were here. Present, not scrolling past your own inner life. That's not nothing. The question on the cover of this video asked, who are you now? Not who were you, not who should you be. Now, after everything the world has asked you to perform, after every mirror that showed you someone else's version of success or beauty or meaning, after all of it, who is actually here? That question won't be answered by your phone. It can only be answered in the silence you're willing to return to. And maybe, slowly, imperfectly, without a plan, you start going back there, not to find a better self, just to find the one that's been waiting.